Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started. We're so excited to have you here at the Norfolk Library as we celebrate National Picture Book Month. And to get us started, I'm going to introduce our lovely panelists this afternoon. So we have Jessica Kulekjian. She studied creative writing and education in college and earned her MA in teaching. Today, she works with homeschooling families through a local public school and writes in the early morning hours. Her passion for nature, free play, and learning inspires all her stories. Jessica's debut, Before We Stood Tall, From Small Seed to Mighty Tree, sprouted on bookshelves September 7th, 2021 from Kids Can Press. So congratulations, Jess, for that. That's going to be followed by First Notes of Spring, Bloomsbury 2022, and Hiders, Seekers, Finders, Keepers, also from Kids Can Press, coming in 2022. She lives with her husband and 3 kids in the Central Valley of California, just a short drive away from majestic mountains, the world's tallest trees, and the deep blue ocean. Jess, welcome. And we
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. And we also have Madeline Klopper. She is a Canadian artist with a Bachelor of Fine Arts and major in illustration from Emily Carr University of Art and Design. Although she grew up in the lower mainland of British Columbia amidst a sea of humans and spent a few years in Vancouver, she has since migrated northward to Prince George, where she lives happily in a little old house with her partner Ben and a sweet pup Heidi. Madeline's work is influenced by childhood nostalgia and the relationships we forge with nature, which I think came out incredibly well in Before We Stood Tall, From Small Seed to Mighty Tree. Her work has been recognized by Society of Illustrators New York, Society of Illustrators Los Angeles, Creative Quarterly, and been featured in 3x3 Magazine, SAD Mag, and Uppercase Magazine. So Madeline, welcome.
Hi, thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
We're excited to have you. Last but certainly not least, we have Jay Kaplan. He has been director of Roaringbrook Nature Center since 1975, a graduate of Cornell University and the Pennsylvania State University. Jay is a past president of the Hartford Audubon Society, the Connecticut Ornithological Association, and the Canton Land Conservation Trust, and remains active with those groups, including serving as chair of the COA's Avian Records of Connecticut Committee. He is also a member of the Town of Canton's Conservation Commission. Jay, thank you for being here representing the nature.
Thank you.
All right, so why don't we get started by Jess, you just telling us how you got the idea for Before We Stood Tall.
Well, before I had that idea, I was working on a different manuscript called Little Twig, and it was a fiction story about a tree wanting to grow up and be big like the neighbor trees around it. And it had a lot of dialogue where the trees were talking, and the story just wasn't coming together. I had, I don't know, so many drafts and was sending it to my critique partners, and they were giving me feedback, trying to help me make it better. And at one point, one of them asked, do trees even talk? And I was like, it doesn't matter, it's a fiction story. And later that day, you, Kelly, who's one of my critique partners, sent me the TED Talk about how trees talk, and the research from Suzanne Simard. And I, at the time, was in the rocking chair, rocking my daughter to sleep, and had my headphones on and watched the TED Talk. And I'll just never forget the moment where I was like, Little Twig is off my desk. I've got it. I have to focus on this. And I was so fascinated by the cooperation and communication of trees. And it just startled me so much, because I was raised to believe that plants were only in competition with one another. And I thought that just the metaphor of the grown-ups taking care of the young ones and the young ones surviving in the forest because of the nurturing care of the older ones, and just the cooperative nature of the forest, just felt like such a potent and important story for us, an example for us. And I just really appreciate all of the stories that nature has to offer us. And I wasn't sure how I was going to turn this into an actual picture book manuscript, but it wouldn't leave my my mind. I even started dreaming about trees talking to each other. And then I actually did have a dream, and the first line came to me in that dream, and I woke up and like wrote my first draft in just a couple of minutes. Just it was very, very rough and raw and needed a lot of work. And then that's how it got started, though. That's where the idea came from.
Jess, and if I'm remembering correctly, you wrote that first draft on your phone, isn't that right?
Actually, yeah. At the time, I was a stay-at-home mom, so my family was living off of one income and things were really tight. And I had two older kids. I was not older, but kids that I was homeschooling, and then a younger, baby. And just sitting at a computer would have been impractical for me. So I actually did all my writing on my phone in the rocking chair. And yeah, I actually didn't even get a computer until I spent the advance money from Before We Stood Tall on my writing computer. And so, yeah, I went from first draft to book deal on my iPhone.
That's awesome. Congratulations. And so let's go to Madeline now. So Jess, we know you had the text, you had agents, they submitted it, Kids Can Press bought it. And so Madeline, why don't you tell us how you got involved?
Yeah, I got in touch, or my agent, Emily, she sent me the manuscript because Kids Can Press was interested in having me illustrate it. So when I read it, I was just, well, I'd been wanting to do like a book about trees because I live in a very foresty area and they're the greatest. I'd also read books like Peter Woolman's like Hidden Life of Trees. So I knew already about like the mycorrhizal network and how like trees communicate. And I thought like Jessica's manuscript was just like a really poetic and really like interesting take on incorporating all of these like scientific themes into like a narrative. Yeah, and then like the reverse structure too was also like super unique as well. Yeah, so once I read it, I was like, I emailed my agent back and I was like, yes, I'd love to get involved with this. Like, oh my gosh, it's so exciting.
That's awesome. And this was not, because I know this was Jess's debut picture book, but you had illustrated picture books before.
Yeah. So I've illustrated several, and then I've written and illustrated a couple as well. So this was I think the seventh that I've illustrated. So it's always really exciting when a manuscript comes your way that really really speaks to you and speaks to like your values as an artist and as like a human being. So yeah, it was just super exciting.
Yeah, having just fallen in love with the illustrations, it's clear how you connected with this manuscript. So thank you for doing such an awesome job.
No problem.
And so Jay, how about you tell us how you got involved with the manuscript?
Okay, well, I'm not quite sure how I got involved in the manuscript. I got an email from Jessica, who I'd never met or spoken with before, asking if I would consider looking at her manuscript just to edit out any potential scientific or natural history mistakes that might be in there in terms of identification of trees, what trees grow in what places. And I'm always willing to do that because it drives me crazy when I pick up particularly a book for children and I find obvious errors of omission or otherwise about natural history. So I'm happy to try to offer my expertise, as limited as may be, in these areas and try to make sure that at least the identification of various things is correct. But as to how Jess found me, I did not know that up until 2 minutes ago.
And so Jay, have you been asked to review books previously?
Yes, I have reviewed a couple of other books here and there, and I do a bit of writing myself. People in Norfolk, if there are any younger folks here, may know me because for many years we went to Botel School, and up until COVID rolled around, we did programs at the elementary school in Norfolk. So I know a lot of those folks, and hopefully at some point we'll be going back again.
That's great. So Jay, I'm actually going to ask you the next question.
Sure.
So when we talk about the communication between trees and how it speaks to a lot of us, because it seems like a lot of us connected with that book on that particular level, why do you think it's important, like, for books like this to be read by children and introduced in school curriculum?
Okay, well, Jessica actually alluded to this when we were kids growing up, and granted, I was a kid growing up much further back than you were, but even when you were growing up, the idea that trees communicated was just absurd. Nobody would even think that that was something that was going on. But the research that Jess talked about earlier before we went on, and other studies have shown that there is a lot more communication going on in the forest with things other than higher order animals than we might have originally thought. And I think that's a really important, one of our major responsibilities here at the Nature Center is to make people not only aware of what's around them, but also aware of the various interrelationships that exist within the natural world, because we need to work within those relationships so we don't make really bad errors with regard to our future. And so I think it's important at an early age that children are exposed to these things.
Okay, great, thanks. So Jess, nature is clearly a theme in a lot of your books. What do you think it is about nature that just speaks to your soul, that it comes out in the words that you write?
Oh my goodness. That's a good question. I think I was a child in the 80s, and so I was told to come back when the streetlights are on. And so I spent a lot of time outside climbing trees, and I think just the freedom and the imagination and all of that uninterrupted playtime outside just really impacted me. And I don't know, I feel like nature is honest, like it doesn't have an agenda. And that's just, I think, really refreshing, and I connect with that.
And what do you hope a kid gets from reading your book?
I hope a kid would connect to nature and want to protect it. Mostly that.
Okay, so Madeline, I'm gonna send the next question to you, because you also are clearly a nature lover, and you said that you sort of live in a foresty area. One of the things that I was struck with was just how many shades of green you used in the book. And so I was wondering if you could just spend a little bit of time talking about your process and how you went from looking at the text of Jess's words to creating some of your images.
Yeah, for sure. I'll do the share screen a little bit for this because with like Jay and Jessica trying to make sure like it was factually correct. I'm on the West Coast, so the forest is a lot different than an East Coast forest, which I'm not as used to. So once they gave me the species list, I went on Google and I ended up making a PDF just so I could have an easy way to reference everything. Can you guys see it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So so with the different species, just to have the different bark and leaves and the seeds and cones and that kind of thing was definitely helpful to just have on hand. So that was a good thing that I did early on. In terms of the process, sometimes I'm able to come up with my own page breaks. So when the page will turn, what text will be on what page, but just with the pacing, kids can send me kind of the page breaks there. So these were the initial thumbnails that I sent along. And I like to print out just a easy template sheet on online, or sorry, on Photoshop, so then I can just sketch easy and not have to worry about measuring, and I can just throw things out easy and all that. So this was the first pass, and it was in a standard 32-page picture book. Then another thing I sent along early on was, since I hadn't worked with Kids Cam before, I wanted them to I wanted to send an example of kind of how the finished art may look. So I knew from the start that I wanted to keep a warm green or like warm yellows and oranges and greens, like kind of palette, as opposed to more of a cool palette. So I just had these like little illustrations that I had done that we're happy with, and weren't necessarily going to be used in the book, but were just like good as like a starting point. What else? Yeah, so through there I had like the color palette worked out, and I wanted to use gouache. So I had kind of like, I had my set amount of my like different tubes of paint that I was going to use, so then I could just stick to that throughout the whole book. So I'm just looking at my notes. I always get.
Please do. I want to hear it all. It's so fascinating.
And just let me know if you want me to elaborate on anything further.
It's really cool to see your process.
Yeah, thank you. And then there's a lot of back and forth with the editor, and then the editor, they'll also like would send it to Jessica, I think, along the way for her feedback. So here is an example of one of the one of the PDFs that I had with them. So they would give their feedback on terms of the layout or the different kinds of trees, and possible changes. And then through that, then I did further edits, and then would do like the more like refined sketches that are like fairly like close to how the originals would like turn out.
All right, so Madeline, I'm going to ask you a very specific question. Can you go back to the spread with the kids and they're looking at the cut down tree?
Yes.
It was one of the first ones.
Yes.
So in the final, you put a dog in there, if I'm remembering correctly, and his little or his or her little tongue is sticking out, and I just love that dog. How did you decide, like, you know, here's the perfect place for a dog?
I guess I just have a soft spot for dogs. So and I love being outdoors with them. They're just always so much fun. Here, I'll just flip to stop share. I guess here's the spread.
Yeah, there's our little dog.
Yeah, he just ended up fitting good. So I didn't have a big agenda with it. Just he was pretty cute.
I love it. And so, Jess, I'm going to throw it back to you, because one of the things you had shared with me is you hadn't actually talked to Madeline directly about the illustrations. And so for people who aren't familiar with the author-illustrator process, do you want to share with everyone what that's like?
Yeah, sure. So traditionally, the editor acquires a manuscript from the writer through their agents. And then we do the back and forth editing until they get it in a spot where it goes to copy editing, and then that's all the final like little grammar adjustments and things like that. And then from there, the publishing house separately arranges a contract with an illustrator through their agent, and they traditionally work with like an art director or maybe also the editor that the author is working with. So the people collaborate in-house, like the art and the editor, but the creators, the author and illustrator don't collaborate. And I think that that's intentional in order to give everybody their creative freedom. But what's so cool about that is there's always just, people call it picture book magic. There's always just things that show up that are just like beyond what most authors that I've heard have said, like, this is beyond what I could have ever imagined. And that definitely was my experience as well.
So, Jess, do you have a favorite spread in the book?
I have several. There's like several of them that I wish like were art on my wall. But my very favorite, just because it just makes me think of being a kid. And let me go find it. It's towards the end. This one's my favorite. I don't know if I'm holding it up good enough.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. I love this one for so many reasons. I just love the expression on the child's face. And I often talk about like unknown situations as, oh, I'm just waiting for the leaves to land, or, you know, things are up in the air. And I just love the way this captures that, like, you know, just waiting for everything to land and watching that moment of, you know, anticipating and wonder. And it's just really, really beautiful.
Thank you. So Jay, I'm going to ask you now. So you had helped Jess on the book in terms of the species, and you've done this before for other people. And so I know she sent you a copy of the book. What was your response when you got it and had a chance to flip through it?
Well, I flipped through it, and then I flipped through it again last night before this, so I could refresh my memory. And I found it really interesting. I did enjoy the illustrations. They're kind of great, but I look for little things that catch my interest. Now, for example, we know that Madeline is from the Pacific Northwest, and we see here, I don't know if you can pull this up. That is a very, can you see it now?
Yeah, well, we see the bird. If you can hold it up a little higher. Yeah.
So that is a bird called a very thrush, which is a northwestern species of bird. If that shows up in Connecticut, it's a big deal. Birders go charging out to see that bird because it rarely shows up in this part of the country. So I always look for those types of things. But it was a little different than I thought it was going to be in the end result, because it was a lot more about the communication, and it wasn't straight out natural history. There was another aspect of it that I found rather interesting that you don't really find in a lot of books. You know, I'll just bring this up. I don't know how relevant it is, but I want to bring it up. There's a famous quote by an environmentalist named Baba Dion. And the quote goes like this. It goes, "In the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught." I don't know, are you familiar with that quote? Because it's a really good one, and younger people actually can relate to it. Not preschoolers necessarily, but fourth graders on up. I think it says a lot, and it talks about how important it is to impart knowledge to children, because they're going to inherit the mess that we've left them, and hopefully they can make the world a better place for themselves and their offspring.
So Jay, what kind of books would you like to see more of in terms of picture books that come out into the world, or books that can be used to educate kids in this regard?
Oh, wow. Well, we get a lot of books from authors. We just got one recently about a beaver and an otter get along. This was a book that was just coming out now. It was done by a young lady who grew up right around the corner from us, Meg Brewster. Brewster's her maiden name, but that's a nice book as well. And we got a chance. I didn't work on that book with them beforehand, but they gave me an advance copy to take a look at. And I think any of these books that come out that are brightly illustrated, I mean, the illustrations are such a big and important part of these books, because you want to catch not only kids, but the people who are going to buy the books for the kids, catch their eye and say, oh, this is cool, I want this book. And then from the brightly colored illustrations, you can get to the meat of the topic about what the stories are, or what the book is actually about. And I think it's really important. I mean, in the old days, kids would get Curious George books and Clifford the Big Red Dog books and all the classic books of a prior generation, but they really didn't have much to do with the natural world and natural processes as they work. And so books like this are refreshing and relatively recent in their evolution, I guess you could say.
Okay, thank you. So Madeline, do you want to respond about the note on that bird illustration, the catch by Jay, that if that bird popped in here, like we would all be super excited as birders?
I thought I was so careful. But I guess I missed that one. I think earlier on I have a Flickr, and I'm pretty sure that's pretty like widespread over the continent.
Except that your flickers are red shafted flickers and our flickers are yellow shafted flickers. So,
Nah.
but I should say that a very thrush actually 2 years ago did show up in Simsbury at a place called Great Pond State Forest. It was there for a few days, and people came from all over to try to see that bird. It was a tough bird to see.
Oh, wow.
I didn't see it. I went once. I didn't see it. But.
Yeah, so not impossible, but it's just very exciting. And I love that Jay found that. And Madeline, I hope you don't feel like you made a mistake or anything, because I think it's very exciting that this bird actually showed up.
No, it's not a mistake. There's nothing in that book that says this is the Northeast. It's more generic than that, but I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah,
it's, okay.
It's like a catch, like only like a birder, like really.
That's right. Nobody else would notice. Nobody else would notice that. But it was a good representation. It was a good representation. I knew right away what it was. You know, a lot of the books, I should mention, a lot of the books we get that are children's books, the illustrators are from Europe or from England particularly, and we start open it up. All the birds are English birds, and you kind of say, "What is this?" And you know right away.
Yeah.
So Madeline, do you ever get nervous when you're making the illustrations that something could in fact be inaccurate, or how common is that?
I do work pretty hard to make sure that I'm representing things accurately, but I think a lot of the time too, you're trying to like interpret it in your own way. So you want it to be accurate, but you still want it to like be illustrated in a way that's maybe not, that is like less realistic and more stylized. So sometimes you can get away with a little more, but with a book, another book that I recently illustrated, it's based in Newfoundland. So with that one, the author had a couple of comments with like, so with like the Newfoundlanders kind of like breakfast and that kind of thing, like the milk had to be like the carnation or similar to it. And like, there's like little things like that just to give it that sense of place.
That's so interesting, because that's only something that like people in Newfoundland would know. So that's remarkable, the level of detail and just the care to attention that the author, the illustrator, Jay is the naturalist, that you have to pay attention to. I really applaud and commend you, because the book is accurate, it's beautiful. And Jess, what was it like for you as the author, you know, putting these words out there? Were you worried at all that you could be making a mistake?
Totally. That's why I sought out some fact checkers, and specifically once we moved to wanting it to be a kind of more different region, why I seeked out so many, because I was totally afraid that I might, you know, misrepresent something. And as a teacher, I for sure wanted this to be able to be something used in the classrooms, and I wanted to make sure it was accurate. And so if there's any mistakes, I tried my very best.
I have no doubt. And so the fact checkers that you used, if I remember correctly, you didn't know most of them, correct?
No, I was encouraged from other writers that were doing nonfiction, and since this was my first one, was kind of finding my way through. They said usually people that are working in whatever field that you're writing in are more than happy to want to contribute to making sure things are accurate for a project like this. And so I started with one of the universities that I went to and emailed the biology department and asked if they could see if anybody that teaches ecology would be interested in reviewing a manuscript for a picture book. And I was expecting maybe just one to maybe get back and say they'd be interested. And I got a couple. And then when we decided to do the maple tree and I spoke with you, you got me in touch with 2 or 3 people from that region. And then I also worked with a horticulturist that had a friend that was an expert on mushrooms. And so he like looked at that list and made sure that like we were using accurate mushroom species. And so that was really wonderful, just getting everybody's input and just it's really cool the way that people want to make sure things are as best as they can be for children.
And so as part of that process, because this I don't remember, and for people who may be interested in how the picture book comes together, so did you contact the experts before Kids Can Press bought it or after?
Both. So the ones that were professors at the school that I went to, I contacted before because I was using this manuscript to query agents. And so I wanted it to be like as submission ready as possible. And I knew that having it fact checked would make it be submission ready to editors. And so I had a couple of those professors at a local university check it. And then once Kids Can had acquired it, and then we were looking at dialing down the species, that's when I sought out some more fact checkers for that stage. So by that point, it was already well into the editing stage. So yeah.
Okay. And Madeline, do you have a favorite spread in the book?
Yeah, I think I have a couple. I think here, let me see. This one is one of my favorites. And then the one with the fallen leaves from above as well. That one there, I don't know, I really enjoyed for this book how I got to like play with perspective in ways that I hadn't really before. So, and then I like the extreme zoom out as seen in the first one, and then like having like the close up where you can really layer in a lot of like details and show like the leaves of each of like the different species of trees. Yeah, and then just like the colors and everything, I was just really pleased with how they turned out.
So that perspective you talked about playing around with, did you try multiple versions of it, or did you, after reading the text that Jess had sent or that you had received, did it just like pop into your head, oh, I think I want to zoom out for this one, or I think I want to do a close in? Can you just talk a little bit more about your process for that?
Yeah, sure. So I think sometimes for some it does pop into your head. I think for the first one, it definitely was like, okay, like before we were mighty, it just like, I really had to be kind of like the end, like how they are like when they're fully grown. So I thought since the trees in this are like in the book are more of the characters as opposed to the people, I wanted to show it more from their perspective. So I thought a downward view would be the most effective. And then for the other one that I had shown, it was, I think was like a similar thing. One of my sample pieces from earlier on was like quite similar. So, and I was like, oh, I really like that one. So I have to like try to work it into the book, and then that seemed kind of like the perfect spot for it.
Okay. So I've heard when people put their books out into the world, you ask them the question, well, how did you know the book is done? And they'll joke, oh, like the book is never done. So like looking back now, both Madeline and Jess, is there anything that you would change? Even though it's this extraordinary book, it's beautifully written, the illustrations are gorgeous, but you know, now that it's out there in the world, any thoughts like, oh, if only this, if only that? And Madeline, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Honestly, when I illustrate books, by the time I've like submitted the final art to the publisher, I'm just kind of over it. Like I've tried my hardest, like I've been staring at all these pieces for so long, and I'm like, okay, I think it's done. And I'm like, who knows? And then there's like a break between when it's actually published and when you get to actually start seeing the proofs. And it was like months later when I saw the proofs. So once I saw those, and I was like, oh no, it was done. It's good. I'm happy with it. But it's definitely easy to have like, yeah, like be like, oh, if I only had done it, like I wish I was more like this other illustrator and I could have done it like this. But at the end of the day, I think I developed it like how I would develop it, and I tried, like I gave it like my 100% effort. So at the end of the day, like that's all I could have like done.
Oh yeah, I look at the book and I was like, Madeline was the perfect person to illustrate that book. And before we get to Jess, start to finish, how long did it take you to go from the sketches to the finished product that you sent to Kids Can Press?
I was actually looking at my emails earlier with the editor and art director, and the sketches, like the thumbnail sketches to the refined sketches, were about from February to April 2020. And then the finals were kind of over the summer from May to August. So at the end of August was when my deadline was for the final art. And then the end papers and the cover and then like minor edits were kind of towards the end of November.
And that was all in 2020?
Yes.
Yes, right, because the book came out in September of 2021. So Jess, I'm going to come back to the question about if there's anything you could do differently, but when did you start writing before We Stood Tall?
That morning that I woke up from that dream where I got the first line was actually January 1st, 2020 or 2018. And I was participating in Storm. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a little challenge for picture book writers to come up with 30 new ideas in 30 days. And that was my first idea for Storm. And I liked it so much that I started drafting it that month. So I started drafting it in 2018. And by the end of the year, I had thankfully acquired my agent, and Kids Can had made an offer. And then I signed the contract in the beginning of 2019.
So for people who may not be familiar with that process, I mean, that's basically what, like 3 years we're talking about, from writing it and then getting your agent, selling it, and through all the illustrations. I mean, it's truly remarkable when you think about the fact that this book has been so many years in the making. So Jess, do you want to answer the question if you could do anything differently with it?
Gosh, I feel really similar to Madeline. I feel like I learned so much through this story. I feel like each project has something to teach me, and I grow as a writer and as a person with each project. And so I'm really happy with the way that it turned out. I can't think of what I would do different. Maybe in the future, I'll look back and be like, oh, this or that I could have written differently. But right now I'm really proud of it, and I know I did my best, and I love it the way it is.
That's such a great answer. I mean, it was kind of like a trick question because it is such a wonderful book. So I'm going to ask a question to all three of you. It's sort of a similar question, but based on your different perspectives. So Jess, you were a debut author during the pandemic, and Madeline, you're a working artist during the pandemic, and Jay, you're at the Roaringbrook Nature Center, which relies on people coming in and learning about nature. And so a lot of things changed during the pandemic. And so what was it like for the three of you to have to keep continuing on with your work that you're doing with the pandemic in the background? So Jay, we're going to start with you.
Well, I had a lot more free time. We were basically closed for almost 4 months, from mid-March until the end of June. So I took the opportunity to spend a lot more time outdoors. One of the things that I did during the beginning of the pandemic was I felt that people needed something positive to look forward to, because if you turned on the TV or listened to the radio or looked at the newspaper, all the news was glum. It was a fairly depressing time. So I, as a person who had vowed never to do Facebook, started doing a Facebook post every night on something from the natural world, and actually did this for over a year. I still do one sporadically, but I did something every night, and people really looked. I mean, there was no monetary value to it. People said, oh, you should edit, you should publish these. That was not my intent to do it. But people really enjoyed it, and I got a lot of answers and replies about how much people appreciated by giving them that to look forward to every night. And it was on plants and animals. So I spent a good bit of time doing that. Now we're sort of in a transitional position, whereas a lot of schools say a lot of the revenue that institutions like this rely on during the school year are from doing school field trips, outreach programs in the classroom. And whereas last year we did a lot of Zoom programs, a lot of virtual programs for the school, now we're sort of in a limbo where some schools are starting to take field trips or not. Again, many of them are not. We'll see what happens in the spring. We don't know yet. But we're starting to get back to a little semblance of normal, but not really where we were. And so we've had to look for other ways to be relevant, doing lots of small group programs, lots of outdoor programs. So we're still doing what we've always done, but maybe with somewhat different emphases and in different ways in order to keep ourselves going.
Okay, thanks. And Madeline, working artist, already had some books published. What was it like for you?
Actually, working on this book was, during the pandemic was definitely harder than I thought it would be. Going into it, like when everyone was isolating to begin with, I was like, oh, I'm used to that, but I realized it was a lot harder than I thought. So I think, when you're trying to stay creative, when there's so much like external stressors, was definitely difficult. So I'm happy that I had the sketches done before it really set in, because I think it might have struggled a little more creatively if I had to like work on the sketches earlier on. But it's like it's definitely it's a big struggle trying to stay creative and when the world is such a shit show.
And Jess, what about you?
Well, I think debuting, I already had written it, had already gone through copy editing before the pandemic. So working on new things was a little bit challenging, but debuting has just been different because when I sold it, that was a different world. I was imagining bookstore events and craft time at the library, or just, being able to do things in person. And so when it came out, in September, we're still being very cautious and want to be. And so there hasn't been any in-person events yet. And it's fine. It's going to be, it's going to take its time, and that will come. And I've just kind of learned to just change my expectations and accept that this is the world that we're living in now, and just kind of accept the surprises that come along the way, like opportunities like this, like over Zoom, being able to connect with readers and other people. And I'm a teacher also, so a lot of my focus has been on connecting with kids that way, just as a teacher. And I'm just working at staying open to surprises.
Okay, so I'm going to twist the question a little bit. I'm going to ask each of you again. So Jess, what's the best way to support a debut author during a pandemic?
Oh my goodness. Of course, buying the book is great. If you buy it and like it, leaving a review somewhere would be great. If you request it from your library, that is awesome, because you can request libraries to purchase books that you would like them to have in their stock. And gifting it, recommending it to friends. Those are all really wonderful ways to support authors and illustrators.
That's great.
And getting it, and also getting it from a local independent bookstore, adds extra support to your local area. Is important.
A lot of local entities need as much support as possible. So Madeline, for not just a debut, but a working artist, what can we do to support the working artists?
Yeah, I think, like buying the books, and if that isn't an option for you, lending it from the library is awesome. And even if you are taking it out from the library, like Instagram and Facebook and all those things are definitely social media plays a big role in artists getting work and that kind of thing, and for sharing work. So if you share it on your stories or do a little post about it, that's always really great to see. So your friends can find out about it. Yeah, I think just stuff like that, and what you said about yeah, like buying it from a local bookstore is always great, or requesting that they get them in stock. Yeah, but yeah, just buy the book.
All right, so buy it, post on Instagram, tag Jess and Madeline. So Jay, what about like these local nature centers, these local museums? What can we do to support all of you?
Well, you can win Powerball and give us a small percentage of your take, but assuming that you aren't planning to do that because you can't lose if you don't play, you can come and visit us. You can arrange to have one of our staff come and speak at your library. You can try to get us back into the schools in your town. There are a lot of different ways that you can support. What kept us going really through the pandemic was the generosity of our friends and members who made contributions in support of keeping our heads above water, and we're most appreciative of that show of support, which is really why we're still here.
Yeah, I will say the generosity from a lot of people. There aren't many silver linings to the pandemic, but as Jess mentioned, it's the opportunity of doing a program like this, to have Jess from California and Madeline from Canada and Jay from, down Route 44, and we're all here together talking about this wonderful book. And so the generosity of people, the way that we're able to connect, I think that is one of the few things that we can say, okay, well, there have been some silver linings. So for the people in our audience, if you want to think about any questions you want to ask to any of our panelists, feel free to write that in the Q&A. And as you're thinking of things to ask or just comments, I'm going to ask Jess, Madeline, and Jay, like, what's next? So Jess, what's next for you in your writing life?
Next is my debut fiction book coming February of 2022. It's called First Notes of Spring, and I'm really excited about it. It's about a badger who plays the drums, and she tries to join the band, the First Notes of Spring, who wake up spring in the forest, and her rowdy rhythms are not really their jam. So she goes off and finds other noisemakers like her, and I'm really excited about the way it turned out. After that, I have another book with Kids Can Press coming out called Hiders, Seekers, Finders, Keepers, and Jay actually helped with the wildlife details in that book as well, and that's coming next fall.
So Jess, how many manuscripts do you work on at one time?
It totally depends on the project and just where I'm at in my creative cycles. Like sometimes just two, sometimes one. I know a lot of people that can juggle a lot at the same time, but like right now I'm currently brainstorming a new thing and kind of finalizing something else. So yeah, it just depends on the project.
Okay, I'm going to make you brag for just 1 minute before we get to the other panelists. So you didn't have an agent, you got an agent, they sold this book, but how many other books did your agent sell for you in 2020?
2020, I think, well, I signed this book. Oh, that was 2019. 2020, I think we had 2 contracts.
And so how many do you have now total?
I have 6 under contract.
And
right now there's a 7th that's out there, and I have my fingers crossed.
Okay, fingers crossed. So, a few years ago, you're just dreaming that someday you're going to be a published picture book author, and now you have 6, maybe 7. What's that feel like?
Pretty special. Kind of like the little seeds dreaming in the branches at the end of this book, hoping to grow up and become what they feel like they're meant to be.
That's awesome. Congratulations. So Madeline, what are you working on and what's next for you?
Well, over the past year, I took a bit of a break from picture books. Prior to that, since I graduated in 2015, I had kind of been working on children's books pretty steadily. So last year, or this past year, I took a bit of a break, and I've just been focusing on other creative things. So I've been doing a lot of pottery, and So, but I think in the new year I'll probably get back to doing some more children's books. So I'll have to go talk to my agent a bit. And next spring, Poppy's House, the book I mentioned about that Newfoundland-based book, is coming out in July. So although I'm not working on a book, I still have something coming out next year. So yeah.
And if we wanted to see your pottery, where would we find it? And just other of your illustrations.
Yeah, so my Instagram is, I'm most active on my Instagram. So my main one is my name, Madeline Klopper, and then my ceramics one is linked in my regular Instagram, but it's Madeline Klopper _ceramics to keep it easy.
Yeah, Jess, do you want to show that mug again? Because that's one of Madeline's.
This is one of Madeline's.
And so Jay, what's Roaringbrook doing these days, and what's next for your nature center?
Well, we're always planning programs. We're trying to get back to some semblance of normalcy here, trying to reinstitute relationships with schools. One of the things that we learned very quickly was that many of the teachers that we'd worked with for many years retired during the pandemic for a variety of reasons, some of whom just didn't want to teach remotely. Others just felt it was time. They were close to retirement anyway. So we're trying to forge new relationships with a lot of different school systems. And myself personally, one of the other things I did in the pandemic was I decided I would see as many butterflies species as I could in the state of Connecticut during 2020 year. I didn't do nearly as well as I'd hoped because we had a drought, and places that the year before had lots of butterflies didn't have any because there was no nectar for them. So I may put that into some kind of a publication because that, to my knowledge, hasn't been done. A gentleman from the Pacific Northwest did a book on a butterfly big year where he traveled all over the United States logging butterflies. That's a little beyond my reach, but I thought it'd be fun to do something similar for Connecticut. Whether or not I ever return to polish that up or not remains to be seen. Right now, it's just sitting in my computer. But we're doing a lot of things. This is the last year of the Connecticut Breeding Bird Atlas project. So I've been doing some stuff with that. And I'm in charge of the Hartford Christmas bird count. So we're gearing up for that. We do a butterfly count in the summer. We do a variety of different natural history projects in addition to all the nature center program we do. So my plate is not empty at this point in time. The one thing I want to mention for you Western folk, in terms of picture books for children, I have a 3.5-year-old grandson, so we have a lot of books, and my wife buys a lot of books. And one that is particularly of interest that you might like is a book called The Hike. Have you ever seen that book?
Yeah.
We have it at the library, so come on in and check it out.
Yeah, I thought that's a great book. And if you want to talk about a book where, from a natural history standpoint, all the animals match perfectly to that particular environment and ecosystem, that is really one of the best I've seen with the birds and the animals that are unique to that part of the country.
That's awesome.
Jay, you might also like to take out the book called The Golden Glow.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that one.
Yeah, it's about like a fox, and he goes on a hike, but and he wants to find this specific flower. But that one's really nice because at the end he doesn't actually pick the flower; he just draws a picture of it.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's really nice because especially in like alpine environments, you're not supposed to actually pick the wild flowers.
So that's called The Golden Glow.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I can't remember the author illustrator, but it's published by, I think, Nobra, maybe.
We can track that down from the title, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It sounds delightful. We'll have to look into getting it at the library. All right, so it looks like we have some shy people not asking any questions, but really, if you have any questions for Jess or Madeline or Jay, now is the time to ask them. And so I'm going to say, Jess, Madeline, Jay, I'll just go to you, Jess. Is there anything else you would love for us to know about your process in writing, what it feels like to be a published author now, Now's your chance.
Well, if there's anybody that's an aspiring picture book author hoping to be published in the audience, I guess I would like to encourage them to say that it can be done. You can juggle lots of things. You can make little chunks of time for it, and you can keep at it, and it can happen. I remember when I was actually working on this on my phone one time at my daughter's karate class on the sidelines. The sensei told all the kids, if you keep coming through that door, you're going to get a black belt, because that's what happens. If you just keep showing up on the mat, you're going to get a black belt. And I was working on this manuscript on my phone on the sidelines, and I kind of thought, like, if you keep showing up to the page, you're going to get published. And so I just want to encourage anybody that might be listening to this and is working towards that dream to keep showing up.
That's great. We did actually get some questions in. So this one is, what did you like best about working with each other? And Madeline, we'll start with you.
Well, it is funny with picture books because you don't have a lot of direct contact with the author. But working with Candlebook was great, and then and they definitely had a good sense of my work, so I felt confident kind of pursuing it how I was imagining it. And later on, when Jessica got in touch with me, it was just really nice to be able to like have a more of a personal interaction with her, and yeah, and see where she was coming from with the book.
And so Madeline, you did all that research, which I thought was so cool, but you didn't speak with Jay at all. Like, there was no communication between you and Jay. That was all Jess and Jay. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Jay, what did you like about working with Jess on it?
Well, she seemed nice. I mean, it's all we did was work through email. We never had an actual conversation until today. But I liked what she was doing, and it was a pleasure to try to provide her with some help, some support.
Jess, were you
really
nervous?
Appreciate it. Totally nervous.
Yeah, like nervous, like cold calling people essentially.
Yeah, completely. I mean, other writers encouraged me to, but yeah, it felt awkward. But I was really thankful. Each person I reached out to was really warm and welcoming and helpful. So I really appreciate that, Jay. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to wrap it up with this one question. What advice do you have for deciding when a manuscript is ready to be queried? Did you query with different manuscripts? So Jess, why don't we start with you?
I queried with this one, and I had some others ready to go when they asked for more work. I just kind of went with a gut feeling for when I decided that it was ready, and also the encouragement of all my critique partners telling me that they believed it was ready. Yeah.
And so Madeline, you have published picture books before, and so I imagine, did you have to go through the same querying process that Jess did in getting an agent?
No, not quite, because the picture books that I pitched, or the publisher that I pitched to was one that I had previously worked for, Tundra Books. So they were always happy to like take a look at something, but in terms of having something that I felt was like ready to show them, yeah, I guess I got a lot of feedback from my partner, or like my sister's a kindergarten teacher, so I got her to look at them and that kind of thing. And yeah, just I think being quite like critical with myself and being like, okay, is this kind of like a story I would want to read? But that being said, since I don't necessarily identify as being a writer, there was, I think, there was a good amount of editing and working with the to get the manuscript like set before I did more of the illustration work for it.
Okay. And so Jay, you're not querying any agents or anything, but what advice would you have for someone who may want to be a naturalist?
Well, I just keep learning. Keep getting outside, keep going on walks, go on guided walks that are offered by nature centers, land trusts, other groups, that the more time you spend outside, the more you learn. And the more interesting it becomes. So.
Jay, I think that's an awesome way to end. So keep learning, everyone. Jess, Madeline, Jay, thank you so much for joining us here at the Norfolk Library. We're absolutely thrilled that you were able to tell us about this wonderful book and that you're just here. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
so
This was fun.
Yeah, it's recorded. We're going to send it out. And so just look for the recording coming from Zoom in a few days, and we'll be posting it on our YouTube channel. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you for coming.